All right, I will open up our Yamaha County Board of Commissioners formal session for September 12th, 2024. It is 10 o'clock in the morning. And Commissioner Starrett, would you please lead us in the flag salute? Okay, item C is our calendar session. Just a reminder, we have no Board of Commissioners meeting next week, no formal session because we will be in Salem for our District 6 meeting where we will discuss legislation with Marion and Polk County. Anything else to add to the calendar? No? Okay. All right, item D is public comment. This time period is reserved for public comment on any topic other than an agenda item, a quasi judicial land use matter, or a topic scheduled for a public hearing. So if you are in the audience and you would like to offer public comment or online, please raise your virtual hand. Okay, hearing none. That brings us to our department update. And today we are joined by our Director of Health and Human Services, Lindsay Manfred. Welcome, Lindsay.
Good morning.
Be here. Good morning.
Morning.
I actually have a handout for.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, I have a handful of just general updates of some of the bigger things happening in our department, but of course, there's always a lot happening. So if I don't touch on anything that you're curious about, or I don't go into enough depth on something I do mention, please just let me know. I'm happy to speak more to it. But before I dive into some of those updates, I did just want to provide this handout with a snapshot of the work happening within HHS. This looks at a calendar year's worth of data. And as you can see, in the last year, we've provided over 200,000 services to over 9,000 people in our community. We're getting close to 10% of our population, if you think about it from the perspective of we're around 109,000 people. So a tremendous amount of work, and certainly it varies from department to department. You can see our adult behavioral health area is where we have the most significant number of dedicated services. But what's not captured here is all of the things that don't touch services, that we can't extract and pull out and say this happened. So certainly this paints a really good picture of the work happening, but it's not exclusive of all the work happening. So happy to answer questions about any of those services or any of those numbers if you have any.
Okay. So I guess for the public, you know, when you say adult behavioral health, can you kind of describe what services means in general?
So with that first box that shows the adult behavioral health, that's looking at both mental health and alcohol and drug treatment services. What we've done is we've pulled out the crisis services, so it doesn't include any of those. So it really is looking at mental health and alcohol and drug treatment. It could be individual therapy, it could be groups, peer services, those types of things.
Did you combine the people count from each individual program?
Correct.
Or could there be overlap?
That's a good question.
Okay.
There potentially could be overlap. So when we're looking at the number of people, there could be someone who in a calendar year goes from youth services to adult services.
Yeah, okay.
It could also be that we have an individual who has developmental disabilities, so they're being served in that program, but also has a mental health condition and so are being served in that program.
Perfect. Thank you.
The youth behavioral health, are you including school-based health clinic population in that?
That would include any school-based health center services that are something we would put into our electronic health record, so like a treatment service, but not the physical health, nothing physical health, only the behavioral health.
Okay.
And if you're interested, I could always parcel that data out. We certainly can based on location of where the service occurred.
Staffing wise, I don't know if you're going to get to that. This is an awful lot of work, an awful lot of people. How are you doing capacity wise?
Yeah.
And did we see any reduction in staff as a result of the budget cuts?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll speak first to the budget cuts, and then I can speak more broadly. We did not reduce any staff through the budget reduction process. We were able to move some one-time funds to cover those costs, and are of course really diving into our budget now. Even though we just got this one approved, we start our budget process essentially on July 2nd for the next year, and are really scouring the budget to see how we're going to maintain that. Because at this point, we really do feel like if we have any further reductions, I certainly cannot guarantee that we would not have staff reductions, largely because so much of our funds are really dedicated to only certain things, largely Medicaid. So what that means is I can't use Medicaid dollars to cover those staff costs in other departments like public health or developmental disabilities. And even in some parameters and with some funding streams, I'm not able to just say these behavioral health funds can be moved to this behavioral health service. So if we have a gap in crisis funding, I can't necessarily just say I can use these funds to cover that cost or vice versa or any of those pieces. So most of our, as you all know, most of our funds come with very narrow scopes of how we can use them. So even though it may look like I have a pot of money sitting over here, it doesn't mean that I can parcel it out in these other ways to fill those gaps. So that's where we're at right now, of course, being very thoughtful and intentional about any vacancy that we have, really trying hard to determine if there are vacancies that we should pause on or not fill at this current time, because certainly thinking about attrition is a lot easier than thinking about actual layoffs or anything of that nature. And as you can see, when we're serving, over 4,000 people in adult behavioral health, and the majority of our vacancies are in therapists and treatment providers, it's really hard to think about not filling those positions when we get candidates that are willing and able to do the job. So we're doing our due diligence, though, to be very mindful about it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Overall, I will say from a workforce standpoint, we are seeing a decrease in our vacancy rates. So historically, sort of pre-pandemic, we would run around a 7 to 8% vacancy rate. It's what we accounted for. We just knew that was going to be what happened. Throughout the pandemic, the highest we ever got was 17%. I will say that 17% was certainly felt and was very intense. It was significantly less than in other my counterparts around the state, which was reassuring. I think a lot of that just goes to the dedication of the management team that really did every single thing they could to support staff throughout those challenging times. I'm happy to say that our latest numbers, looking at so far this fiscal year, so looking at July to now, we have decreased and we're running at a 10.8% vacancy rate. So that's really great news. We're definitely headed in the right direction. I will say the bulk of our vacancies still are in our therapy staff. Right. So some really critical components. So we're definitely seeing relief in a lot of areas of our workforce, and still a lot of challenge with that one particular area.
And one more question is, as far as that behavioral health funding that was supposed to help with bonuses and education and paying for certifications and things, has that helped at all? Not only with retention, but with recruitment?
It's a really good question. It's a little hard to sort of pinpoint exactly what may be having an impact. But I will say, sort of with the totality of everything, we are seeing better retention rates. So that is helpful. I think where our challenge is just that throughout the state, there's only so many therapists. And, when there's only so many therapists to go around and everyone needs them and everyone wants them, it's just hard to get new people into the organization. We have seen a significant uptake in the tuition reimbursement, which is really exciting. So a lot of staff who are case managers or alcohol and drug counselors going to get their master's degree, so they'll be duly credentialed as therapists, and this is really, at this point, given the workforce dynamics of the state and really the nation around behavioral health providers, I think the more we can incentivize and sort of grow staff within our teams that have been here, are dedicated, this is their community, this is where they live, this is where they grew up. I think those are the folks that are way more likely to stay with us and to sort of build and continue those roots. So I've been really pleased to see those. That's really exciting. Absolutely.
Good, thank you. Good news.
Yes.
I have a question. I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but the claims submitted for veterans,
Mhm.
is that up or down? How does that compare to previous?
I think it's pretty stagnant. I think it's a
Okay.
fairly consistent number. I could certainly go back and look at previous calendar years.
Okay.
It doesn't tend to fluctuate much.
Okay, and then this came up last night because I think the city of McMinnville was dredging up their business license fee discussion again, but the restaurant inspections, can you clarify what's the relationship between your shop and restaurants? What do they pay for, if anything? What services do you provide to them?
Sure. So the public health department has a statutory requirement to license and inspect restaurants. So we don't set the criteria for what those inspections look like. That's done at the state level, but we are tasked through statute to do the licensing of new facilities, and that could be mobile facilities, it could be fixed facilities, as well as the annual licensing that's required. Restaurants are required to have inspections every 9 months. It's sort of a strange timeline there. But that is the requirement. And then, of course, following up on any concerns or complaints. So occasionally we will have someone contact us and say, we ate here and everyone got really sick. We'll say oftentimes people sort of attribute that to the last place they ate, which is not always the case. Oftentimes it's, where did you eat 24 hours ago?
Yeah.
So we filter through some of that, and that may mean just going out and checking out what's happened at the restaurant, make sure that the temperatures of how they're cooking things is appropriate and things like that.
Okay, so at what point are they paying for this, or do we absorb it into just their statutory requirements?
So the restaurant, from the state's perspective, the intent behind the restaurant license fees is that is the support and the funding that should pay for the service of the inspections. For us, it doesn't cover the full cost, so there is some general fund in that program. But we send out the licenses annually. So once a year, a restaurant will receive a notification that their license is due. They pay the fee that's approved by the board annually, and then that they get their license either established or renewed, depending on if it's a new or established facility. And those come to the board once a year to approve those rates. And the rates are different per size of facility and type of facility.
Okay, so the every 9-month inspection, it's just part of the fee.
Yeah,
The license.
Yes, because
Okay.
that's the statutory requirement.
Okay. And then if we get complaints about someone, are there fees associated with that, or are they just
No,
part of our job? Okay.
no, very, very rarely there may be repercussions if there's something really unsafe happening in a restaurant, but that is incredibly rare. And I've always kept the board apprised of any of those situations for sure.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner, any questions?
Yes. Have we denied any services? Anybody coming in and said no because of availability of that service?
That's a great question. I would say, I mean, there might be times where we can't, let's use the public health clinic. Someone may come in and they need some sort of vaccination that we don't carry. So that may be an example. As far as like behavioral health services, we don't deny anyone service But depending on what our capacity is, our ability to get them in may be longer than we would like. We will generally be able to do an assessment, and there are rules and requirements around how fast we do these things. So there's both statute as well as CCO contractual requirements, as well as requirements that we have in addition to those things as a certified community behavioral health clinic, which I can speak to a little bit as well, that have timelines associated with that. And largely it's 2 calendar weeks or 10 business days we're required to. However, if anyone ever comes in with crisis services or any imminent concerns around health safety, those are addressed always in real time, and we would never turn anyone away for that.
And we've always met our time requirements.
Most of the time.
Okay.
I think that we've had some challenges where our biggest challenges is from that time span of when we have someone assessed to when they meet with their first therapy appointment. So we'll get them in, and we're usually pretty good about the timeline for the assessments. We meet those pretty regularly. But where we're seeing the biggest funnel or pinch is from assessment time to when they kind of begin most of their sort of what we would consider typical therapy treatment. We've worked really hard to try to put some stopgaps in between then. So if it does look like we are 30 days out, so they get their assessment and it's going to take 30 days before they can see their provider, we try to get them enrolled in groups, connected with a case manager, connected with a peer, other types of people who it may not be their therapy treatment, what they had anticipated, but someone that's able to support them, stay connected to them, account for some of that time, and just make sure that we can kind of keep eyes and ears, and they have someone they can reach out to if for whatever reason they begin to decompensate or escalate or anything like that.
Perfect.
With 4002 in mind, how are you anticipating being able to meet that?
So that's a great question. And it's a good distinction to make between some of our treatment pinch points related to mental health versus alcohol and drug treatment. If anyone walks in at any point during our day-to-day business hours, they can get an alcohol and drug assessment. And we have made sure that we have the capacity and the ability to do that, and we have a staff available to do that. So if we're just talking about an alcohol and drug assessment, which doesn't require a therapist, we have different staff that can do that, and it's a much more condensed process. We are able to see those individuals. We used some of the initial Measure 110 or Behavioral Health Resource Network funding that came to us that we had to apply for, but we received. We used that to make sure we had that capacity so that we had consistent walk-in access for those services. It's really when we start getting into the mental health component that we see more of the pinch point.
We know there's that co-occurring disorders that they go hand in hand. So how do you decouple those?
Well, you really don't. And the process, what it sort of looks like is, because you're absolutely right, it's unusual to find just someone who has a substance use disorder that doesn't have some underlying mental health component to it. So what we do is we'll see the person, they can be assessed for the alcohol and drug treatment. That gets them immediately enrolled in our services. They can start meeting with their treatment groups and teams and all of those pieces. And then we will get them assessed for mental health. I mean, unless for some reason it doesn't seem like they want to, and sometimes that's the case too, or for whatever reason, maybe it's a DUI and this person really doesn't have a more significant problem, but they're addressing this one issue. So, but if there is that need, and oftentimes there is, that will be incorporated into the treatment plan further on. It just doesn't happen right away. Most of our assessments are what we call integrated assessments. And so they're looking at both alcohol and drug use and abuse and mental health. But where we've made this sort of bifurcation of splitting them or in 2 circumstances. One is if we have someone coming in and they really do need either they're on this 10 or 14-day deflection sort of time period, or oftentimes if someone's needing medication-assisted treatment, we have same-day access for that. So those are medications that help curb cravings and withdrawal symptoms. And so we have worked really hard, the medical team, to make sure that there's daily access for that. So that's the other circumstance in which we would use the alcohol and drug assessment initially, but then they would circle back and get the mental health assessment. But we don't, our goal is to never turn someone away, because we know if someone is in that space of, I'm beginning to have withdrawal symptoms, and we say, we'll see you tomorrow, there's a really good chance they're going to go use, because those
Yeah.
symptoms are excruciating.
Yeah.
So that's the
Okay.
other circumstance, yeah.
Great, thank you.
Do you track the success rate on that?
We do, it's a hard thing to track though, and there's a lot of different ways it is tracked. We do have a track for, we call it successful treatment completion. And so we can pull those numbers, and we also know that it's a very, it tends to, we have people that are very successful, and then we see them again, and there's a bit of a process there. So, but yes, we do track some of that.
So it sounds like you've had some 4002 assessments come in. Is
Yes.
that going, I know we're going to meet in a couple weeks, but is that going okay so far?
I think so. We have had, I believe there were sort of 10 deflections that were within Yamhill County. 2 have come in to receive assessments. And when those, one person just came in on their own. They brought their form. Said,
Good.
I was given
Yeah.
this. I need to.
what we want.
They were like, let's get you back right
Good,
now.
good.
And another person, we did some active outreach and called, and they came in, which was great. So we will continue to do outreach and try to engage with the individuals. If it is safe to do so, we will do that in the field, go out and do that. Although we aren't planning on doing any sort of cold calls or knocking on doors just for safety reasons. But
Okay. School's back in session, so obviously I'm thinking now about fentanyl education and some of the things that we've done targeted towards youth. How is that going in terms of, folks interacting with that, kids interacting with that, or
yeah.
getting into schools?
One of the things that we put together at the end of last school year was a document that we could share with schools that really provided a sort of at a glance, these are all the different things that we can help support within your school. And it includes alcohol and drug prevention, Narcan training, and then other things as well, not all related to that. And part of that document also connected to usually where there's a school requirement for some of those things too. And just really as a way of, hey, we know you have this requirement and we're happy to help support if there's any way that we can support. So most schools have been really happy to have some of our public health team members there. And then of course, we do have our behavioral health staff in schools with those contracts. So
Yep.
we have contracts with all of our school districts. And so we do have the treatment providers on there that are providing treatment and also doing a lot of just connecting with youth that maybe folks are concerned about or things like that. So the beauty of those contracts, because it's that 50-50 match, is we have the Medicaid funds and we have that are paying for 50% of it. And it's so restrictive. Really, that is for the treatment component. But because we have that other 50% coming from the schools, that allows that sort of we can't bill for this. It's not claimable from a Medicaid standpoint, but we're able to do this sort of low level support, as well as, diversion classes and things like that if the youth gets MIP or things like that. One of the things that we are really interested in, and our schools are really interested in, and Commissioner Starrett, I know you've heard some of this, is the program Sources of Strength. It started out as an alcohol and drug prevention program, but as they continue to collect data on this program, they quickly realized that in addition to decreasing alcohol and drug use in youth, including illicit drugs, tobacco, things like that, also decrease suicide rates and things like that. So it's really just an all-encompassing program that is time intensive, but oftentimes the things that show strong results are, but it really helps build those help-seeking behaviors in youth. So before things get to a point where they're at risk for whatever adverse outcome, they're connecting with a trusted adult within the school setting. about either themselves or their friends or someone they're worried about, and really does work to sort of cultivate that culture of asking for help when you need to. And it's had really great results. And all of our schools, I shouldn't say all of it, the majority of our schools that have we've communicated with so far about this have shown a lot of interest in that program. And so that's something that we are looking at getting started.
Okay.
And it has been done. Our team has been trained in this program to be able to get it launched and get staff in the school settings trained. And they recently launched in about a year ago at George Fox at the university, and I've had great success there. And the folks within that setting have been really excited and happy with it.
Great, thank you.
Our fentanyl website that we stood up here early last year, or was that 2 years ago? Anyway,
What's that? Yeah.
how's that going? Is it as successful as we thought it would be, or?
I don't have the numbers on the number of sort of hits, but what the last time we looked at it, what I did find is when we sort of boosted any sort of messaging or posts around that to link to the website, we'd see significant increase. So if we would do that sort of on our Facebook page, boost a post, then we would see a really big peak of traffic on the website. I will say just anecdotally, I have kids in both the middle and high school, and I was doing, all the back to school stuff that parents do. And in both schools, I did see campaign material posted throughout the school, which was really exciting. And of course, I took pictures and sent it to the public health team and said, hey, it's out there.
Okay. Any other questions? I don't know if you had more to your presentation, but.
There's always so much. Just a couple of quick things that I'll mention. Hopefully this month I will be submitting a letter of intent to award a contract for our electronic health record. About 2 years ago, our current provider just let us know they weren't going to be doing that anymore. And so we've been sort of flying without the backbone or platform support of that organization, which feels a little daunting to have something that's so critical to our services. Feel like it's always a little bit anything could break it. But we have got great support from our IT team. So thank you so much to Shane and the folks that work with him. And we are really excited that we have are coming to a completion of that RFP process to really hopefully move forward in getting a tool that will work for all of us and make us all feel comfortable, like the system is going to continue to be supported if we have needs, and of course, be able to meet the client's needs. That's probably the other big thing. We talked about deflection. Oh, and I'll just mention the public health move happening probably on the 24th or 25th tentatively of October. We are incredibly excited. That team is anxious to get over there. And so we have set a tentative move date of October 24th and 25th. And they will be over next to the current Kirby building, what I like to call Kirby 2.
Pulls up the I like Kirby.
All right.
Hey, thank you very much. And it looks like we've got some other items for you here, so I'll try and get to those as fast as I can.
I'll hang around.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me. All right, so that concludes our department update. Item F is our work session. There's nothing today. Item G is consent agenda, nothing there. Item H is old business. H1 is consideration of approval of a board order and findings in the matter of upholding the planning director's land use compatibility statement approval. And docket M-05-24, tax lot number R3210-00500. The applicant is Red Hills Farm LLC. This is continued from July 18th of 2024. I will move approval. Is there any discussion?
None.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Right, motion passes. Thank you. I1 other business, I1 is consideration of approval of ordinance 937 in the matter of amending Yamhill County Building Code regulations. And we are joined by our planning director, Ken Friday. Welcome.
And I was gonna have Tim Kiddiga, our building official.
Good morning, Tim.
Hi.
Okay, so
Taken.
this Let me see. So this is a new ordinance, but technically we're amending the existing code. Okay, gotcha. Okay, so I've got several questions. I'm thinking maybe Ken, if you want to just give us a quick background and
Sure.
let us
This,
know.
this is a request to update the building code and to add inspections of pools and pool barriers, signs over 7 feet in height, and demolitions. And to provide a little background, we used to do these inspections for decades. Several years ago, the building code agency decided to drop a list of items that required permits and left it up to the local jurisdictions to decide if they wanted to bring those back on to be regulated. We just kind of let it run to see what people would want. The jurisdictional optional items included things like fences, flagpoles, cell towers, storage tanks, and we can give you a further list of them. The entire list is under 101.2.1 of the county of the state building code, which Tim Kadiga has a list of it. We're not asking for all of those to be included, but only the 3 that are listed, as we have had requests to have those items inspected. And as I indicated in the memo, like with pools, we've had some folks come along and indicate that they can't get insurance unless they get an inspection done and approved by the county. And so Tim's here if you have other questions related to it.
So part of this I noticed is just sort of some ticky-tack stuff of updating language, right? Like mobile home is now manufactured dwelling and all those kinds of things. But I'm wondering when it comes to the pools, so homeowners insurance is now requiring these inspections.
The pools were always in the building code, so they've been getting inspected for years.
Okay.
Probably 2 code cycles ago, which would be approximately 6 years, the building codes division pulled the pools along with these other items. I have copies if you would like a copy of everything that was pulled.
Okay.
And left it up to the jurisdiction if they wanted to require these permits. And at first, there really was no change. People kept buying pool permits and stuff. And then as the word kind of got out, fewer and fewer were being permitted, which we didn't really see an issue with it. But then we got calls from people who bought some of these houses that were now having trouble getting homeowners insurance because the pools were never inspected. And there's the electrical component to it is a real life safety issue, because if the bonding in the pool is not correct, you leave people open for electrocution, being shocked in the water with electrical components to it. And even though they're exempt from the building permit, they're still supposed to get the trade permits, which they're not. The pool barriers, the covers that people, if they fall in, they land on the cover and can get out, or a fence around it, those permits, which are still required, are not being purchased. And we have no way to track where pools are being put in, because they're not getting any pool permits, even though they're still required.
Okay.
So
And this is only in-ground pool. We're not talking above
if
ground.
the pool is over 4 feet, has a barrier over 4 feet height, a side that's over 4 feet, then it doesn't require a permit. So if it's an above ground pool, you don't have a permit issue.
Okay.
Does
You know-
that specify somewhere else?
Excuse me?
Does that specify? Because I didn't read that in here, and that was one of my.
Once you go into the codes section of it for the barrier, it talks about the barrier being 4 feet and you don't have an opening where they can climb up, those types of things.
Okay.
That's where it kind of comes into play. They're considering the pool side a barrier.
Okay.
And so as long as you can remove the ladder to get into the pool, there's a barrier that exists.
I see.
In terms of these being retroactive, could a homeowner request inspection of an existing after it's been installed?
The problem is we don't have a way to verify the bonding if we don't physically look at it. And that's a crucial component. It would be, I mean, the barrier, yeah, we could issue a permit to get the barrier, but I would be a little apprehensive on the electrical side since we didn't actually look at the physical bonding and now it's buried in concrete.
Yeah.
But the only request has been from people that already have a pool or are going to put a pool in that says, my insurance company needs this. That's been the only request for this. And the reason I ask that is, can that be written into the ordinance of that it's basically a requested permit and not, hey, I'm worried about now the neighbors looking over the fence, and now we're gonna be inundated with phone calls of neighbors turning to other neighbors because they're having fun in their pool, they're loud, whatever it is, they end up getting turned in for their pool. And now we're buried with trying to send code enforcement out to try to take care of all the issues.
Tim and I were talking about the enforcement component of this, and in the 30 years I've been here and the 20 years Tim's been here, we can't think of any time that we've ever done enforcement on a pool or had complaints on a pool. Now, I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's not been an issue in the past. Yeah, and I think that's because the people that are putting them in usually have gotten permits in the past for them. And it's only come about that the sale of these properties, the insurance companies are clamping down and they want to see that there was a permit and inspection done. So, I can't say that it's impossible that that might happen where we might get a complaint about it, but it just hasn't happened in the past.
So what does a homeowner do who's getting some heat from their insurance company?
Honestly, I don't know because I never heard back from them after my initial contact with them. So I'm not sure what they did to get in compliance, if they were able to have somebody test the bonding. And it may be that they dug part of the pool deck up, exposed the bonding, and were able to test the continuity of it. That gets to be an expensive test.
Yeah.
Way more than the cost of what the initial permit would be.
I'm just unclear. So I'm purchasing a home and it has an existing pool that was never inspected by the county. And now I can't get homeowners insurance. So
Well, they won't give you insurance on the pool. They won't insure the pool component of it. Whether they write a homeowner's policy exempting the pool, I don't know. But then that leaves the homeowner kind of in a liability spot for somebody who gets hurt at the pool. So
I'm
Pools
looking
in
at the
general.
realtor shaking his head up and down. So it sounds like that's the case, but where I guess, so if you're in that situation and your homeowners isn't going to insure your pool, then I'm not sure where the county comes into that in terms of making this a requirement.
well, I guess my point would be is it's always been a requirement to get a permit for a pool until the state came out and said, we're going to make it put the onus on the jurisdiction to say whether they're going to require a permit for a swimming pool. If you look at most of the other jurisdictions, a lot of them have already adopted these policies that they're going to require a permit for a pool. Just because of the safety issue of it.
Cities? Most cities require permits? I would assume so. Okay,
I guess, and I'm trying to in my head, try to separate this, right? So if somebody's just putting a pool up in their backyard, has a barrier, we're okay. It's, if you're gonna get a track out there, start digging a hole, pour concrete, rebar, have a light in it. Although pumps are hooked to them, even if they're above ground, so there's electrical.
but what I'm hearing is you need a permit to do that, but people aren't getting permits.
You would, for an above ground pool, for the pump component, for the pool heater and system, you would get an electrical permit, but typically it's hardwired at a location next to the house with a disconnect box on it. When you go into a in-ground pool, now a lot of those electrical components, including lights and heaters and stuff, the heater's above ground, but then they run all the piping below ground into the pool. And there's a lot of rebar in the pool, a lot of rebar around the deck, which is now wet with electricity run to it. And that's where the real danger component comes in, I guess.
So we aren't separating barriered above ground pools then. So the above ground will need to require a permit.
An above ground would only, if they don't have an electrical disconnect already available, they'd have to get an electrical permit, but it wouldn't require a building permit.
Okay, so I could go to Walmart, buy a 4-foot side pool, comes with a heater and a pump, and I could go to a already existing disconnect. I don't need to come see you.
You would just need an electrical permit for the connection to the disconnect. That's it.
If I have a plug, so disconnect and the plug-in's already there.
Most of those are hardwired in because of the amount of electricity they
Yeah.
take.
Mhm.
It's going to be like your air conditioning unit, that it's not just plugged into the wall. If you had something that you just plugged it into an outlet, you're golden.
Yeah, okay.
You have to do that for a jacuzzi tub too. Above ground jacuzzi,
Jacuzzis, plug in or hardwire?
hardwired.
Those are all hardwired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just because of the
I see
amount of
most houses
electricity.
now, I mean, if they're done right, there are like options to get the disconnect there.
So the permit, the electrical permit is required. I guess what I'm for an in-ground pool, if you live in the county, where do you need a permit? Is it the electrical part of it?
Technically, you're supposed to have a permit for all the trades, even if it's an exempt item. So you need electrical, plumbing, and mechanical, anything that's required within that system. The problem is, since they don't have to get a building permit, we have no idea if they're being put in. And a lot of times those permits are not being purchased because we don't know that that a pool is being put into a residence.
Okay. But we're having issues with folks sort of getting caught up then in their insurance problem.
Yes, we've had, like I said, we've had some calls regarding people being able to get insurance because they were never inspected, and because the state had taken this out of the building code, there's this void of what needs to be done.
Okay. I guess with these things, I really feel most comfortable with more notification to residents than less, and yet we don't know who has pools. So how do you notify, right? It's sort of
Right.
now we're in this vicious cycle.
I don't mind this as long as we address the enforcement portion of this. And I just don't know how you do that other than looking at why are we looking at this now, which is for insurance purposes. And if somehow the code can be written that it's specific to the issues that we're seeing of why it's in front of us now, instead of being broad like this.
So technically, this clause will only go into effect upon approval by the board. So there's going to be a 6-year gap where nobody would have been required to have a permit. And so if they built it in that period, they still would have, sounds like they would have had to add a plumbing and an electrical permit. But if they didn't have a permit, they didn't break the law. So there's no enforcement. But it also sounds like they probably should get it fixed because they would want it insured. So maybe it's a good thing that this comes to their attention through enforcement or whatever. But we could certainly work with them and not go straight to, here's a citation for your for your problem, although there wouldn't be a citation because it wasn't required. Does that make sense? It is a weird little, almost like limbo land of 6 years where the enforcement options are limited, but it probably would be good for them to find out about it. So maybe we get a complaint, we notify them and we just work with them rather than go straight to citations. I know I'm jumping, but
What's the cost for these inspections? If I want you to come out and look and,
So it's all based on the value of the cost of the pool. And they range in value of $80,000 to $200,000, depending on what they build. The electrical, plumbing, and mechanical fees are really actually pretty small, maybe a couple $100. The pool fee, just off the top of my head, I would venture to guess is probably going to be under $1,000.
for us to come out and inspect.
That's what it would cost to purchase the permit. So let's say if somebody had a pool and they wanted to get it inspected, they would buy the permit. And I wouldn't even be really concerned about the mechanical and plumbing because usually those are pretty minimal. But I'd have them get an electrical permit, but they're going to have an idea where the bonding stuff is so they could check continuity of it. And then we could issue a building permit and we could go out, check the barrier, and check the other components that we'd normally check. Granted, we can't look at the rebar, but I wouldn't be too concerned of that because normally they dig the pool hole and then they put their rebar in and they shotcrete against the ground and the rebar.
Right.
And then you put water in it and that pushes the concrete against the earth rather than trying to support it. So it's not that critical of an issue. It's mainly the safety cover and the bonding of the electrical.
Okay. Where does it talk about access, the county's access to a property? Like what are the?
we're talking about the right of entry.
Mhm.
That language was added to right at the end under the enforcement clause.
Page 6. B.
I must have a different page.
Yeah,
but-
top of page 6.
Um. The way this is worded, I don't know if I mean, I would prefer, this is probably consistent with what our other codes say, but I would prefer that there be more attempts to locate the owner and sort of gain permission
Okay.
rather than a right of entry. I can come on your property whether you like it or not.
This one gives me heartburn. This is like, I'm flashing back to what we just went through not that many months ago. I don't need to bring it up. But it leaves it open for code enforcement to do what,
This is for the
Tim.
building official only. So this is not code enforcement. Code enforcement has in our code enforcement
Okay,
code, he
even-
has to follow the
even
ad
worse than.
warrant process.
So what I did, and I'm not an attorney, but I took out of make a reasonable effort to remove that gray area. So basically, no, they cannot. And if it goes to the very end of where provided by law, then it is a sheriff going with them if it took it that far. Otherwise, we do not need to be putting anybody's safety at risk here without getting in touch with somebody first.
Okay, so the provided by laws is mostly about warrants. It's not necessarily about the sheriff's office. So it would require we would apply for a warrant from a judge, show reasonable reasonable suspicion, probable cause, there's the word. And the judge would order a warrant, and then we would go out there and we would
With a sheriff.
most likely, yes. It depends on what's in the order from the judge, or if we think that there's concern there, we would ask the sheriff's office to go with us. I think that's normally how code enforcement does it. Yeah. So if Tim was going out to property and was refused entry, we would go through that same process.
To me, how it's written now, it doesn't seem like that. It seems kind of gray, like it leaves it up to Tim to decide. Not that I don't trust Tim to decide, but we don't want that responsibility on the county. Be like, Tim unilaterally said, oh, 3 times I can't get a hold of the guy. I'm going on the property. I'm going to go take care of this. Versus, nope, I've tried 3 times. It did not happen. Here's the next step I have to go take, which is through the court system or whatever
Okay.
to gain entry, which is then with the sheriff. So we don't end up with a situation like we did not that long ago.
I can try to work with that language and tweak it. So do you want to make exceptions for emergencies?
I don't know what an emergency would be, but
I think again, you're leaving it up to somebody to determine what an emergency is, or you leave it with the law enforcement that then it's like that is their area of expertise, let's say.
Okay. I don't know. Sorry, go ahead.
This is not the language that would be used to accomplish code enforcement. This is the language that would simply be used to accomplish inspections once someone has received a permit, right?
No, we have under Oregon law, we have authority. Once you buy a permit, we have authority to go onto the property to do inspections. Now, most of that is because they've requested it, have an inspection request in, so then we show up and do the inspection.
They're expecting you. Yep.
Correct. Sometimes the homeowner isn't expecting us because they've hired a contractor and the contractor didn't tell them. So you kind of get into some odd situations like that, but we at current through the building code and Oregon law, once you purchase a permit, we have right of entry, not just a willy-nilly go on their property.
Right.
But to do
Because
the
they've
inspection.
signed the building permit
Correct.
saying, yes, no, I understand that they're coming on my property to inspect, which is right. But the way this is written, it seems almost
Yeah, this isn't about, this isn't necessarily when they have a permit.
Correct. This is if they do not have a permit.
Right.
And there is a problem on the property.
This one is the one.
What is written in this.
Yeah.
here, yes.
Right. Yeah, so I can change it so it matches code enforcement. That's fine by me.
Yeah.
It's.
I like what he just explained to me better. When I'm reading through this, I'm thinking code enforcement.
Well, I don't need to rewrite the statute part because that's already exists. So if you just want to take this out entirely, that's fine by me. So the right of entry would only exist when they have a permit. That's essentially what it would be.
And that's currently what Oregon law
That sounds
allows.
great to me.
Everything else goes through code
This seems
enforcement.
just
So
a
if
lot
we have an issue on a property, it goes directly to code enforcement for them to handle.
Yep.
And we don't even, and that's the way we've been operating for quite a while
Yep.
now.
Okay.
Okay.
The only time we run into an emergency,
We had some issues with some properties with electrical issues and it's pretty dangerous. So that's where they came
and
from.
that's the big emergency.
And we didn't have
issue.
time to go through code enforcement.
Got it.
That's where it came from. But it's a rare occurrence. And so I think that if we just sort of handle those when they come up, we'll
But
figure it
even
out.
for that, you literally, it's a phone call to the sheriff and
No,
let
the
them-
sheriff
No, it's
office
not.
doesn't have that
Uh-uh.
authority.
Then why don't we? why don't we gear it towards being that then, if it is a problem?
Sheriff's office would call Tim to come because they're not experts in that stuff.
Right, but they're there holding his hand.
I guess I can write it however you want,
Okay.
but it's what's our goal, I guess, or is your concerned?
Safety, period. For Tim, for Kemper, for.
That's a bigger conversation that we'll
Okay.
probably have. to
Well, I
have with
thought
the-
that's
not
what
just
this was
safety.
for, so.
It's not just safety for them. It's also private property
Well,
rights and making
yes.
sure that we're not
Yes.
being
Mhm.
the heavy hand of government.
I agree.
Agreed.
I'm looking
But
at
so
this as-
describe for me, I don't mind the building code and right of entry. That sounds
Yep.
fine and consistent
Yep.
with what we've had.
Oh.
But so the electrical emergency,
Mhm.
in broad terms, what was that? And what was the response that was required for a quote emergency?
And why wouldn't it have been the power company rolling in there if it's an emergency, I suppose?
I don't know enough about the authority granted to power companies, but what we ended up doing is we called the power company. We had them turn the power off because we didn't have enough time to go through code enforcement.
And that's typically the
Okay.
process it has to go through.
Yep.
Is the one that I believe she's talking about was there was a tenant in a property. The homeowner came out, or the owner of the property came out and did a bunch of electrical work, which was then causing problems within the dwelling.
Gotcha.
Our electrical inspector went out. They were actually invited out by the tenant who
Yep.
has control of the property to have them look at it. He called Mac Water and Light. They came out and disconnected the power.
Yep.
Okay.
We don't have that authority unless we are invited onto the property or they have a permit. And in this instance, I know the
Or a wall.
actual homeowner kind of squawked about us going on the property, but he has a tenant in the property who did invite us and they have
Mhm.
control of the property.
Mhm.
So they can legally do that.
What
So
I
it's
can,
Covered there, that's.
yeah, I can rewrite this so inspections outside the permit process require a warrant. I'm fine with that, but we
And
might as well
that's
just
fine.
rely on code enforcement, honestly.
I like how Tim explained it to me for staying in building permit area and how he explained it. I'm okay with that.
Okay, so I just want to clarify. So that would essentially eliminate this clause entirely. So is that sort of what we're thinking?
And it would be rewritten.
But that's rewritten to what?
What Tim said.
But that's already in statute. I don't need to rewrite what's in statute. That
Then it
authority
sounds like we're
grant.
good. Other than
Just
an
take this out.
emergency that a power company would come disconnect.
At current, for us to go on the property, we would have to be brought in by owner or a tenant.
Yeah.
Sometimes you hear of stuff through customers going into a restaurant and they see things and they'll call us or things like that. To then have that authority, you would have to have something within the ordinance and you could limit it to an electrical emergency. You know, you could narrow that scope down.
So if you remove this language, that's fine. It'll get kicked into code enforcement and that's just a longer process. And so we'll have to rely on other authorities granted in law to sort of
Yeah.
deal with emergencies when they come up. And we'll
Yeah.
figure it out.
Well,
Who
to do that, it gets
knew?
rid of all my other questions, so.
Who knew that pools would be so complicated? Okay, so then this needs to be amended and come back.
I'll come back.
Okay. Okay, any other questions regarding the amendment? All right,
Thank you, guys.
thank you.
Would you guys like copies of what the Oregon code?
Yes,
Yeah,
if
that'd be
it's
great.
not what this looks like, then
Yeah,
absolutely.
this is right out of the Oregon code book. It tells you what items were taken out of the building code for us to inspect. And then there's some that cannot even be adopted by ordinance.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Tim.
Okay,
I think so. Yeah, I think that was it. Thank you.
okay, so we will continue item I1 to a future date to be amended. I2 is consideration of approval of grant agreement number BHD-25-27 between Yamhill County and the Criminal Justice Commission to fund behavioral health deflection programs in the amount of $541,450, effective upon full execution through December 31st of 2025. So this is obviously our House Bill 4002 funding. It is more than the original amount that they told us that we would get. And we did submit a supplemental budget that has since been approved for the use of those extra funds to round out the funding for a DDA to cover these cases. So I would move approval of item I2. Are there any questions, comments?
None.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. I3, consideration of approval of a memorandum of understanding between Yamhill County Health and Human Services and Newburgh Dundee 911 or NewCom to utilize active 911 software to provide information and referral, crisis intervention, and suicide prevention services effective upon full execution through June 30th of 2025 with automatic renewal unless sooner terminated. And this is similar to what we've been doing in other jurisdictions with having our COS teams be informed of calls, especially calls that have sort of those crisis intervention components to them. Obviously, this does not replace Newburgh Dundee PD with showing up to calls, but certainly aids in the treatment or dealing with those calls. Any questions?
No.
I will move approval of item I3. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion passes. Thank you. I4 is consideration of approval of an agreement between Yamhill County Health and Human Services and the Sheridan School District for behavioral health counseling services for the 2024-25 school year in an amount not to exceed $84,578.22, retroactive to September 3rd, 2024 through June 12th of 2025. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Okay, any further discussion?
None.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed, same sign. Great, thank you. Motion passes. I5. Consideration of approval of an agreement between Yamhill County Health and Human Services and Achieve Center for Leadership trainings in the not to exceed amount of $12,900 effective upon full execution through June 30th of 2025.
Director Manfred, I know there's going to be some questions. Director Manfred and our administrator and I had an opportunity to spend a lot of time talking about this and just trainings in general. And I came away with an understanding of how important it is to equip our supervisors and our management team with the ability to be able to lead a diverse work group and a group of an ever-changing group of employees. We've got an entirely different climate out there in terms of employment and staff and retention and all of that. I had a couple of questions and concerns. And at this point, my recommendation would be to hit pause on this particular contract. And I'll tell you why. Why your explanation of the need for leadership training was, there's no argument there. And it seems like it's critical and it's necessary. But I was looking at some of the components that I brought up in our conversation yesterday, and in further delving into some of this organization's information, I had a couple of questions. First of all, I was looking at, we were talking earlier about how strapped our HHS budget is. And I'm looking at this, and I had a couple of questions and maybe a couple of options. I noticed that this organization, which is, by the way, based in Canada, and I'm wondering if how we came upon them. So I've got that question and how they became recommended to us, because I know that there are very fine leadership trainings that originate in the United States. They also have a template which really does refer to Canadian government documents and United Nations documents, and another ideological concern here regarding just some issues that we discussed yesterday. So I pulled that, but I also know that they have, based on what I was looking on their website, they've got free webinars and free resources that deal exactly with some of the subject matter you were talking about in terms of conflict resolution and leadership and management. So I'm wondering if we could first explore what we can get without spending $13,000. And then the other thing is, if we can look at perhaps leadership organization in the state or in the country even, and also make sure that we're looking at something that's not going to be ideologically biased or the underpinnings of that. The other question I had is, you were mentioning that OHA gives us money for trainings. Is the money that comes, what are the strings attached to that, the trainings that we get funding for?
So a lot of questions there. I'll do my best, and if I miss something, you let me know. So the agency itself that the contract is with came to my attention by one of my management team members who had attended live training from them and said they did a really nice job. It was engaging. I learned a lot. It felt like it got concrete instead of just these theoretical conversations where we send folks to these trainings and they're like, well, this is great. I have all the theory, but how do I actually put this in practice? And so had a lot of really great had a great experience, shared that with us. And so that's what started on the trail of looking at this as an organization, or it says as an organization. The trainers, they do use different trainers for different trainings based on the person's expertise. I do know that at least 2 of them, including the one that we were hoping to begin in October around change management, is someone who lives in Seattle. So I think that they must employ people within the United States, because that is the person who was going to at least be doing that first one. I don't know the individuals slated for additional ones, but could certainly get that information. We did try to curb costs. There were options to bring trainers on site, and we said, no, we'll do them virtually. That way we're not paying any travel costs, but made the decision. We did want our management team to all be in the same room, because there is a lot of value in having those trainings together where there's a lot of synergy. I mean, not to go fully in a different direction, but there's literature on the way the brains work together when you're in a room versus virtually. And there's lots of benefits to doing it that way. But to save costs, we said we could have the presenter be virtual. We'll all just be in one room together. So we did try to be mindful about those pieces. We do try to capitalize on free trainings. So that happens in a number of ways. We have the Relias system that we use to track trainings, as well as policy attestations for all of our staff, because we are required to demonstrate a lot of that when we have our audits. And so we're always encouraging people to use those Relias trainings. We've used trainings through CIS. Sometimes those are in person. Most of the time they're virtual as well. But again, we were really looking for something where we could build that synergy with the group versus having individual managers or supervisors do trainings independently, where we're not having that conversation and discussion and experience sharing around the struggles that maybe they're having, that they're trying to work through and be better equipped to manage.
The OHA component?
Oh, yes, thank you. So OHA does not necessarily provide us funding for training, but they do have requirements for us to have training through some contracts. But I will say that the one that I think I was referencing around a requirement to do an annual training with all staff that is focused on some component of equity, diversity, inclusion, something in that realm, largely lies with our CCO contract, which is a requirement that the state has for them that is then passed on to us. This is not necessarily to meet that requirement. That requirement is for all staff. And so we do work to put together a one-time or once a year training that is in that genre of training for all staff. This is outside of that, but I do think it is something that our management team has asked for. Again, back to that workforce diversity and just trying to be better equipped to make sure that we know how to handle situations, both from an inclusion standpoint of really wanting to make sure that everyone, clients and staff feel included and appreciated in the work that we do, but also from a liability standpoint of knowing that these are things that we have to be aware of, not just because we want people to be included, which is true, but also from a liability standpoint.
Thank you.
Is there stipulations that it has to be a paid for seminar versus a free webinar?
With the
Like
CCO
through, yeah, through
contract,
CCO, through OHA, through CCO.
I do not believe that they stipulate that level.
This just happened to be everything that was in it where it was worth the 13,000 to have this done. or this
It
program.
is worth it, certainly from my perspective. It is also 6 trainings. So it is 6 independent trainings on 6 different topics, ranging from a variety of things that we're trying to build within our management team. It includes everything from change management and really looking at, in all honesty, the science behind how you support a large team. We have almost 400 employees. How do you do things like support significant changes that feel disruptive to their work, that a lot of people don't like at the beginning? You know, how do we use what we know about people, human behavior, all of those things to really do that in a way that is smooth and hopefully has as many or as few wrinkles as possible. So that's one perspective. There's some just generalized leadership skill development around what does it mean? What's the difference between management and leadership? There are differences. So things like that. We have a variety of management staff. So we have managers that have been in our system for a couple of decades, and they've done a lot of different types of maybe some trainings. And then we have individuals that are incredibly new and they have never had any sort of training around these things before. And even with the individuals that have been with us for a long time, the world around us is just changing so rapidly, and we have to be able to respond to that. And so part of this is really just building those skills within those members of our team, which is about 35 people right now, when we're fully staffed.
Yeah.
So my comments were just similar to Commissioner Starrett's about having a foreign corporation come in and sort of teach us about DEI that didn't quite seem to fit or make sense. I do acknowledge though that, you know, that's one of 6 trainings. And the other ones seem incredibly useful and critical for a management team, and valuable and beneficial for them. I'm still unclear as to how it will be funded. Did you say a grant? Did you say a grant from OHA?
No, we don't have funds. I should back up just because I want to make sure that I'm really clear. There are times where we have specific funding that comes from OHA for very specific training, but this is not one of them. So just sharing that because there might be other times where I'm talking about a specific funding stream for a specific, but this is not one of those. So we generally look at things like any sort of pay for performance dollars that we may have from the CCO that have some flexibility to them. Sometimes we're able to, based on different types of grants or proposals to the state, build in certain percentages for training costs. You know, it's generally never, you know, $13,000, but we do that so that we have some reserve and some money that we can put towards things like this. But it's all, you know, OHA knows that there's a percentage of training dollars built into what we're sending them.
Okay.
I had a question. You know, I had originally when we started our discussion, I do have concerns about the DEI trainings anymore. And I think we're starting to see, as I mentioned, the pendulum is swinging because a lot of the research shows that this is almost sometimes counterproductive. You know, you go into a room full of people with the statements that, you don't know you're biased, but you are, and here we're going to tell you why. So I know that's been softened quite a bit, but I still think that DEI training in many respects can be counterproductive. And a lot of the research is showing that, and they are pretty much less effective than we would like them to be, even though everyone can embrace the same principles about a kind, compassionate, charitable, open workforce. But I'm wondering what kind of data is collected in your department to show how these are working? Not necessarily surveys from folks who've just been through one, but basically, are you seeing that the issues you're trying to address are being addressed effectively?
That's a big question. We don't have any mechanism in which we are maybe capturing sort of quantifiable data related to that. What we know is just anecdotally what we hear from staff. I can say that I think individuals that are in more of what we would consider marginalized populations within our communities that are then part of our workforce have expressed appreciation around some of these things, where there's trainings to learn more about perhaps specific cultures or groups of people. I think that there has been a level of appreciation when we've been able to hone in on certain populations of people who we provide care for that have maybe a higher risk related to something. I know we've talked about sort of the group of people that are at highest risk for suicide. And, we know that is middle and older adult white males. And so that I think is part of what we like to think about when we're thinking about equity. It's not just about sort of how we're interacting with each other or policy level things, but it really is how we do our work to identify those groups of people who are highest risk, and how do we tailor the work that we're doing to make sure that we are reaching that most in need population, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I was just going to add on, I think like any type of preventative training or measure like this, it's really hard to measure because a lot of times it's usually, you end up in a reactive situation. If you're not doing the trainings, you're not doing the skill building, and then you start getting bully claims, complaints, lawsuits that, some of the things that could come out of these, that you end up with that negative result, and then you end up being reactionary. And a lot of these trainings, that what we're, I think if you ask any of the management team, I think everyone kind of knows my kind of stance that I feel like, the more training, the better that we can do to better equip our management team for the variety of issues that are presented to them. Because a lot of times when you have, in just speaking to a new manager, and thinking back to my days when I first came into management many years ago, usually you're promoted through the ranks based on your technical merits and your skills, and you demonstrated some leadership ability and some of those things, and you come into a position, and then you're thrown at, from the very start with a variety of issues, interacting with your team, ADA, basic leadership, work performance issues, policy, procedure, HR, lawsuits, grievances, contracts. There's a lot of this information that's out here. And so this training is in addition to a lot of the other trainings that we're also doing through HR, through CIS, through some of these other trainings. Some of the weaknesses that we have, like I'm not picking on CIS, but a lot of their trainings, when they're coming, they're looking at it strictly from a risk and liability lens, from an insurance. When I bring in an outside counsel to talk about labor, they're coming in from a lens of collective bargaining, PECBA, things like that. HR tries to do the best they can with the small HR team that we have to kind of cover all bases. And the one thing that gets missed is kind of building on those basic leadership skills. And I really see trainings like this helps build that foundation, that then all the other trainings, as many tools that we can give our managers to have in their toolbox, the better. Because I think, one, you're going to see positive interactions within the team, employee retention,
hopefully you'll see fewer disputes, fewer grievances, fewer claims, a lot of these things that come up when we're not doing it well. And so that's why again, sorry, Mary, you heard me go over this yesterday, but I'm a huge proponent for trying to make sure that our supervisors and managers are equipped with all the tools that they need, and recognizing, and I think Lindsay said it really well, just kind of describing our management team, that we have a full range of very seasoned managers to brand new supervisors, that this is their first time, having to deal with some of these issues. And, my 30 plus years of being in management level positions, I don't have all the answers. Even, I benefit from attending these trainings as well. And I encourage the department heads to continue, because we'll never have all the answers. And like Mary, Mary, as you were saying, we are seeing a changing workforce. We're seeing a lot of issues that we're dealing with today that 5 years ago we were not dealing with, or 10 years ago we weren't dealing with. We've seen a lot of changes in legislation. We've seen changes in the workforce. So, honestly, I would like to do more of this with our management team. We're trying to do the best we can to reinforce this. And, so I just wanted to say, I think we come out way ahead with implementing these trainings, and I understand some of the questions and concerns, and we can look at some of the details in that. But I'm a huge advocate to making sure that our management team has all the tools that they need.
And
So
I agree 100%. I'm wondering if we've seen any reduction in the problems in the workplace as a result of doing trainings. Are we collecting any data to look at specific issues in our organization, saying, wow, this stuff is working? Because we really don't sometimes in government really look at the return on investment. We're like, well, we're gonna spend this money, but really, what are we getting for it? So I'm just wondering, what's the net result of doing all these trainings? Although you made a great case yesterday for the leadership, the culture, coaching strategies, all of that. I do have a concern about the continuation of some of this DEI stuff. And the problem is, or I guess I should say, it's instructive to know that some of our other neighboring counties are not doing this anymore. They're using their own internal types of trainings in terms of DEI. They're not calling it that. I know there's a commissioner in Clackamas County who is anything but your average person who could be against DEI, and he said, no, we don't need this overarching type of program in our county, and had it abolished. So I reach out to everybody to see, what are you guys doing so that we can make better informed choices? And that's what I'm hearing, that, as I said, the pendulum is swinging, and I love everything on here. I'm not crazy about the fact that we're dealing with a company that's in Canada, and I'm not, because I don't think we need to. I think we can be spending our money here. And I also do have concerns about some of their policy statements and the DEI component. So I was wondering if we could remove that, replace it with something else, and also be collecting data on whether any of this stuff is working. Are we seeing a change in our workplace for the better in terms of grievances and problems and complaints? And I don't know if we're actually addressing what the problems are by doing yet another training, but I might be wrong. That's pretty much a Ken question in terms of, are they working?
I don't think we're doing enough of them to know if it's working or not. I mean, I think we have to do them.
And
to know.
sometimes it's just, oh, we checked this box. We did our training almost for a liability, standpoint of it. But it sounds like we're super close. Is this something that we can tweak a little bit and get it done? I'm definitely in agreement with the US based. There's got to be companies based in the US that we can hire to do this.
That's not the province of Manitoba. That's what the contract says.
Like I said, that there's many of the staff are US
Yeah.
residents that are training, and the ones recouping at least a significant portion of.
Of course,
the
we will
cost.
save 30% on our money when it goes to Canadian.
There's and some of their foundational, they refer to Canadian documents, UN
And I will
documents.
say,
And I see those as, that's part of their structure, and that is what they refer to some of their guiding principles. And I don't see that as something that, you know, really is a really good fit. So I'm just saying perhaps we rethink this, we tweak it, and just maybe bring it back for other options. That's my overarching impression, but you know, whatever anybody else thinks, I'm just sort of like this on this particular one.
I mean, we're making light of it, but the point is that I would rather keep the money in, you know, a US company. And we did approve a DEI training for a community justice team recently, and that gal was based out of Portland. So I know they're here and those folks understand our specific culture in Oregon, which may be more useful, right? Maybe not, I don't know. But that's just, you know, that's my point. I'd rather be sending money to American companies, but so are you saying that you would feel comfortable going forward with the removal of that one training?
We had that discussion and I don't think that you were interested in that. Is that correct?
I would say it's not my preference to do that. And we really do need all of these trainings. And if there is another way to go about it, where we can do the 5 remaining trainings through this contract. But I think I do need to express to the board that that will leave a void in what I'm hearing from my management team that they need more support in. And that is all of these trainings came from them. You know, after conversation with them, I asked them, where are your pinch points? What is painful right now in your work? Where do you feel like you're struggling? Where do you feel like you don't know exactly what to do when something happens? And these were the areas they wanted more support in. And I know we've spent most of this conversation around the one particular training. And I will say that I think our leadership team really wants to be able to have a conversation around the EDI topics that it really is just with the management team, where they have more flexibility to really express sort of their experiences and what it's like for them when they're not in a setting with, you know, a bunch of people that they may supervise, or where you always have to keep a bit of a game face on and not be able to talk necessarily about the challenges that you're experiencing leading or trying to lead a diverse work group. So I think that's a long answer to say, of course, my preference is to keep the contract as whole. And if we do modify it to remove one of the elements, I would hope that we'd be able to look elsewhere to find a way to meet that void with those managers in terms of what they're telling me they need.
Understood. Yeah, I think my preference would be to just kind of revisit this. We're not here next week, but the following week, and maybe come back with some options that, number one, address 2 of those issues having to do with an American company. And I know this is scheduled to be October 15th is the.
Well, I would just add that if the concerns is with the contractor, you know, you're basically asking us to go back to the drawing board or Lindsay to go back and find a different contractor.
Correct.
Which is not as easy as it sounds to find someone that does the comprehensive number of trainings that we're talking about, right? So it will be more work on my team, and it may cost more money because we will have to go and we may have to do an individual contract with an organization that specializes in change management. And then I'm going to have to look for someone who does it in this. I may be able to find someone that has the sort of comprehensive portfolio to allow the pulling from various things, but I don't know that I will. So that's just a risk that we would be taking.
So I think that this company is most likely not the only ones who are doing all of these. We have we've had an explosion of training organizations that have really proliferated over the years. So I think it's probably safe to say that there are other organizations that would be able to do this. They can't be a one-off. And I would say my recommendation would be for us to revisit this and come back with, yeah, it's easy because we've got it down on paper and we could basically just go ahead and do this. But I have so much hesitation, even though I hear all of the value, I have hesitation about a number of different elements. And I think that if we're going to be spending $13,000, we can do better and find a better fit. So that would be my recommendation.
Can you share that document that you found about the company? Because I am curious to follow up and read that as well. I did not see that.
I'm just going off what I found on the website having to do with mission, vision, beliefs.
Okay.
And
I just, if we're going to postpone, I think that we would.
it's just on their website. I was just kind of delving into, I've done a sort of a cursory look at their website and some of their trainers, and it seems like there's a lot of well-qualified folks who know their subject matter. I just want to make sure that the underlying concerns are addressed and that we look at that going forward in other trainings that we do, so that we're not having this constant conversation about this. I just taking some information and counsel from other commissioners in other counties who really have come to this place as well. That's how I feel personally. So I don't know what the rest of the board feels, and that's that.
Well, to me, this will come down to cost. So I don't mind delaying. I always like more options. But if those options do come back and the cost is double, I'll have to think really hard
Sure.
about where we're at with it. So,
Agreed.
but I always am down for more options.
I also think one piece to consider as you're thinking about cost is the cost of 6 trainings is less than the cost of 1 investigation. And at any given moment in time, we're doing multiple investigations. So I think this, back to your great question, really, Commissioner, around return on investment. I think that there really can be a significant return on investment in these items. And I'm hearing your direction that I need to look for additional potential companies that are able to provide this type of training.
I would just, I don't know, just a suggestion would be reaching out to Clackamas County, reaching out to Commissioner Ben West, reaching out to Commissioner Bethel in Marion County, reaching out to Commissioner Pope. These are folks that we regularly communicate with at AOC meetings, and asking their information. I don't know what everybody else does. I'm just trying to make sure we're not so insular. And I understand the piece about, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I want to make sure that if we're going to do these, there's no guarantee. We've seen that. You could do all the trainings in the world. If somebody wants to, let's just say that it's not necessarily a guarantee. So
I'm kind of reading the room here. And it seems like we've been working on something for a year. All of a sudden it comes down to a timeline and this needs to be done like by tomorrow. I just want to make sure that we're not like, this has to be done. Is it okay or it seems like there's heartburn about delaying this for just 2 weeks?
It's going to take me longer than 2 weeks to bring you back a new company with this information.
I see.
Yeah. So I don't think there's no outside factors pressuring a timeline in terms of some sort of rule or regulation. I think that this has been something that my team has been really wanting for the better part of a year. And just given everyone's constraints, it's taken that long to get us to where we're here now. And so there is a bit of, oh goodness, we have to go back to the drawing board and start over. So that's probably what you're sensing, but there's no outside factors that are requiring us to follow any.
And also I've been, I don't think it's a secret with the management team that I've been advocating for ensuring that we're getting our managers trained.
Yeah.
So
and
some of this is coming.
It sounds
from
like
my
everybody
direction as well.
agrees with that.
Yeah.
There's just little particulars of it
Right.
that if we can tweak from US based, which sounds it might be a hang up. And the DEI portion of this, if we can tweak it a little, it sounds like the training can go forward, no problem, but.
Well, and I think, the only questions that I'm kind of raising, because if it's concerns that, about where this contractor is based in, you know, because we followed procurement rules for that. And so we're kind of getting a little bit of policy direction here that it sounds like for certain trainings or certain elements that we need to make sure, you know, doing a verification, you know, for certain elements, making sure that they're a US contractor or, you know, are based in the US or something like that. And so that's why I'm kind of like, if the question is really about elements of the scope of work, or if it's the contract, and if the board is really not happy because this is a Canadian corporation, that, you know, I don't want to spend a bunch of time on the scope of work if ultimately the biggest concern is we need to look for a contractor that's you know, located in the US, you know.
I mean, I don't think there's any secret there that most people strive to, you know, spend local whenever you
Right.
can. I mean,
Right.
so I don't see that as being.
Yeah. And, you know, and I will say, we do interact with our counterparts in the other counties, you know, whether I'm interacting with my counterparts at the different counties or Lindsay's interacting with her counterparts, you know, there is a lot of information exchange that's happening. Our HR team, there's a lot of that networking that does happen when we're looking at contractors, trainings, and, you know, but again, you know, it's the saying that gets used a lot around AOC and everything else. 36 counties, 36, you know, different counties, you know, we all have different issues, different workforces, different, you know, environments, different needs that we're working on, you know, so we try to do our best to leverage those resources and network as much as we can. And, you know, and then other times, you know, we have trainings like this that come forward because we have a manager or someone who goes out and attends something and like, wow, this was fantastic. And you get the positive feedback, you do some research in it, and it's like, yeah, you know what, this looks like this would be great for the whole team. And that's kind of a normal,
That was the case, yeah.
that happens sometimes. And, you know, because I myself we've brought in trainers that we've done at management team that was based on trainings that I sat in on. I was like, you know what, that was really good. And the rest of the team would benefit from this. You know, so we understand the questions.
I do think I need clarity on the scope of work. I understand the contractor themselves and that area, but what I am not certain of is if the direction I'm being given is that the management team is not able to do a DEI training.
I guess we have to define DEI because yesterday we had a conversation about what does DEI mean. I think in the common parlance and what we've come to see DEI morph into, I think it's becoming more and more accepted to say, yeah, this is really gone way too far. I want to make sure we're not doing that. I will not feel comfortable approving a contract that disparages or diminishes any racial group or brings a presupposition about oppressors and that type of thing. We're seeing way too much of that in language that has now become accepted. I cannot feel comfortable about that because I want to make sure that if we are talking about common decency and kindness and understanding different people, that we're not coming at it the way a lot of these trainings have initially done. We talked about different types of people, and you mentioned that it would not necessarily involve race. When race has become a cudgel, I think it's way more divisive. When race becomes just the main way we identify people, that has become a pejorative anymore. So when I talk about DEI, I would like to know that we're going to be addressing issues that you mentioned were really important to your managers that did not address race, gender. It's how we're just dividing each other, and that's how we have to label people. And I think that's actually causing more harm than good. So I don't know how to answer that other than to say the subject matter in DEI, oftentimes in DEI components of trainings, is really problematic.
Can we get that portion of this from this company?
They don't like to share the curricula because typically they've done a lot of work on putting these together, and anything they hand you could then be used. So I understand that part, but I also have asked in the past, can we see some of this material? Because then it gives us an idea, but then you also understand that they're reluctant to share that information.
Sure. The contract itself and the scope of work has a paragraph around that, all of the training topics, including this one. And, we had the conversation yesterday that you referenced, and just for the benefit of the other board members, part of that conversation was really, what are the goals of this training? Is it going to be a shame-based training? And the answer is no, that is not the intent. The intent of the training is to say, how do we, as managers, as supervisors, as leaders, sit in a room full of a very unique group of people, a very diverse group of people, and have the skill set to make sure we can draw everyone in, to make sure that we have the skill set to be able to make sure that we are thinking about the pieces that we need to be thinking about with a diverse work group, which we have people who are 18 to 70 working with us. There's variation there. We have people who come from big cities. We have people who have always lived in a small, there's just such a diverse group of people, and we need to be able to hold everyone accountable. And we need to be able to hold everyone accountable while also identifying and acknowledging the different ways that people learn, the different ways that people understand communication, right? These are all parts of creating an inclusive environment, which is really what this training was geared towards.
So we got 2 weeks. Is it something where Commissioner Starrett and Ken and Lindsay Manfred can all get together and have a couple more options, or maybe it comes back as the original option based on the 2 parameters of it being US based, and either tweaking this DEI and seeing what that DEI portion of training is, or get rid of it, and come back with an option that everybody's happy with, or by 2 weeks from now?
26th, I
If
believe.
I need a new contractor, I won't be able to have it in 2 weeks. I can promise you that. It takes a long time to identify a group of people, to get the contract in the right format, to do all those pieces is a very laborious process, which I understand is needed. But definitely, we're not going to be able to identify a new contractor and get it to the place of bringing to the board within 2 weeks.
But we can have some options. We can have.
If the consensus of the board, I'm not going to take any further action on this. Basically, Lindsay and I will get together and we'll go back to the drawing board, and based on a scope of work of what we got together, we'll go through the procurement process and find another contractor.
Well, no, I didn't say that.
Oh,
You're,
Oh, I know. I'm just throwing it out there because
it sounds like I know we're assuming that this company's not going to give us the DEI portion of it, but if it means no contract at all, they may tweak that a little bit, but like, here's this portion of it so that we can at least see how it is. And if Mary is okay with it, then away we go.
Right.
And maybe we end up leaning on the Canadian based one, because maybe we've made a couple phone calls to a couple US based ones and they're $35,000. So I think right now, high level, it's a couple phone calls to a couple other training based companies in the US.
Okay.
And this one company around the DEI portion that there's uncomfortability about,
Right.
and see what that looks like. And if we're still unhappy, then fine.
And sorry,
But I don't want to just,
right. So
Go
I
ahead. No,
was
go ahead.
misunderstanding. So my
clarification.
part was, because we could go back and modify the scope of work and what we're purchasing. What I didn't want to do was necessarily go through the exercise of modifying the scope of work if the original concern is you don't want to go with this contractor. I was going to say, so that's what I'm
oh
trying
no,
to
you could
navigate.
bring back, let's say we can get this all ironed out in 2
Okay.
weeks, and you had other options.
Okay.
It still comes down, there's many of different parameters for me, but if one of them is price and the next 3 are 35,000 and this one's still at 12,900,
Yeah.
I'm still going to go with the better deal,
Right.
assuming we can tweak the DEI portion of it. So,
Okay.
no, I would not throw it away. It's
Okay.
just options.
All right. I just wanted to make,
Yeah.
so.
Thank
And
you
to
for
be
the-
clear, this would be, in other words, enough material for us to understand how that DEI part will be structured so that we can have some measure of comfort around how it's going to be approached, because there's a bunch of different ways to address it. You can do it with an iron fist, and you can do it with you know, a velvet glove. And I want to make sure that we're doing the latter.
And after our conversation yesterday, Commissioner, I did reach out to the contact with the organization to ask for more details, even if it's not, you know, the full curriculum as you shared, but more details on that. And we'll make that available as soon as I hear back from them.
I would think even if they know specifically the trainer that's going to have that DEI portion and they call Commissioner Starrett and explain, this is what I'm going to do. Without giving any, you know, here's no video links, nothing that can be replicated. It's a phone conversation with that trainer.
And also, I mean, I know that sitting in on these types of things, when there's sensitive information and you've got a group of employees and managers, is I can understand the wisdom in not doing that. But I think at some point, having a commissioner aware of what these trainings entail can go a long way to diffusing some of the concerns or not. And I don't know how you do that and still retain the confidentiality and the sensitivity of conversations.
Oh, when we
I
do
would
these
agree.
trainings, there's nothing confidential about
Absolutely.
it. And, you know, so if a commissioner wanted to sit in on one of these trainings, because we did that, I want to say,
The one
couple
from
years-
Collaborative Consulting, right? We
Right.
sent the information out. People were commissioners were welcome to join if you.
I joined
Yeah.
that last one that we did,
Mhm.
and, you
So
know,
absolutely,
so
no
th-
secrecy.
there,
That's would be a really, did you want this? That would be a big piece in terms of even going forward. Hey, you know what? Nobody got beaten up at this, you know, nobody came away with black and blue marks. That's a big piece. Obviously, the Canadian corporation, obviously, I mean, the rest of it looks really, really, you know, helpful.
Okay.
I guess, you know, we're talking about workplace bias and making sure that we aren't applying biased lenses in our management teams. And yet the company that is supposed to be teaching our management team about not being biased has a reconciliation statement of, we understand that these connections are impacted by colonization and that there is trauma in our relationships and the land and the indigenous ways of life. We commit to listening and learning from our relationships and to be guided by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's 94 calls to action and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We acknowledge that deep prejudices, racism, and violence towards minority groups pervade society, and that we have a responsibility to work against structures and attitudes that oppress others. So having a company whose entire philosophy is based on some very strong statements that you could also argue have a bias to them is why we continue to have heartburn. It's also why certain counties have just done away completely with this type of training.
Yeah, I mean, when you see that and you start to look deeper into some of their policy statements, it's, oh, that was a little harsh. Anyhow, that's just me. So maybe we do take a look at what other, but I think underlying, this is sort of woven into the fabric of what this corporation is. And I don't know how you get away from that in a training if this is what defines you. And they're clear about what defines them. So there's that piece. And then there's, yeah, so I kind of reject the notion that there's nobody else out there that can help our employees.
Okay, well, at a base level, it sounds like there's not consensus to move forward at this time, so we will come back with some answers, hopefully, to those questions that everyone seems to have. And should we expect to at least have an update discussion 2 weeks from now in our next meeting?
I don't know.
Yeah, I
about
mean,
2
for at least
weeks.
the high level stuff. And if it becomes to a point where it looks like it's going to drag on because we do have to find another company, then I'd say just between these three, we can figure out where to put it on the calendar from there.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, so we will.
Thank you very
continue-
much. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay.
We will continue the discussion for September 26th. Okay, and that brings us to the end of our other business items. We have no public hearings today, and that brings us to announcements. So obviously we honored the anniversary of 9/11 yesterday and honored the thousands of lives that were lost. And there were several memorials throughout the county that were just really special to watch, especially everyone's sentiment on social media and just throughout the community. It was heartwarming to see the grit and resolve and selflessness of Americans, especially in the aftermath of that tragedy. So I wanted to acknowledge that. I wanted to also just give a quick update. I will be attending a meeting tonight regarding the Shemeketa bond. There's a bond on the ballot in November, this election. And it's an informational meeting. I'm just going to go and see what it would mean for our taxpayers so that I can inform them as to what they can expect to see on the ballot, but also what it is intended to fund. I think it's intended for CTEC programs and the science lab and some other things. So I will be attending that meeting tonight and will provide an update. And just a reminder, we have no meeting next week. Those are all my updates.
Well, we do. It's just not here.
District
Yeah,
6.
true.
And maybe we can talk about these contracts with our fellow commissioners.
Yeah.
I've had conversations with a number of commissioners, but maybe just in terms of, how do we move forward?
Okay, any other announcements?
Willamina mayor resigned effective on Monday.
Oh,
Oh, really?
that is a enormous loss. for the
Oh my
community.
goodness. She's
She's
the
phenomenal.
coolest ever. Isla Skyberg resigned. Replacement's gonna be Vicky Hernandez. She's a
Yeah.
counselor now, I
Yeah.
think.
Mhm.
She's on the ballot, so she'll finish out Isla's 2-year term.
Okay. No one can replace Isla
Mm-mm.
ever, no matter how wonderful they are.
That's all I have.
Yeah, thank you.
What did you say before that?
Mayor,
No, before that. Did you say anything? I had a note and now it's gone. Darn it.
nope, just had the mayor on there.
Okay, if there's nothing else for the good of the order, I will adjourn the Emho County Board of Commissioners formal session for September 12th,